The moment I saw the clear liquid in the syringe catch the afternoon light, something in my gut twisted with a wrongness I couldn't name. For 3 months, I'd been feeling worse instead of better, my body deteriorating while everyone around me smiled and assured me the treatment was working. But that syringe looked different from the ones at the hospital. Thinner, clearer, almost like water. I am grateful you are here with me. Before we begin, I would really love to know where you are watching from. Comment your city below. Now, let me tell you about something that changed my life forever. My fingers trembled as I reached across the kitchen counter and snatched the syringe before my husband Marcus could inject it into my port. The motion sent a sharp pain through my chest, where the chemotherapy port had been surgically implanted 2 weeks after my stage 3 breast cancer diagnosis. Marcus's face went white, then red, his jaw clenching in that way it did when I questioned anything he did. "What are you doing?" His voice came out strangled, tight. I held the syringe up to the light streaming through our kitchen window, examining the liquid that was supposed to save my life. My nursing background kicked in despite the fog of fatigue that had become my constant companion. The viscosity was wrong. Chemotherapy drugs had a distinct appearance. This looked like saline, maybe even just water. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. Without answering, I turned and strode toward the bathroom, my bare feet slapping against the cold tile floor. Marcus lunged after me, his hand grabbing my shoulder with enough force to spin me around. I stumbled backward, catching myself on the doorframe. The syringe stayed clutched in my fist like a lifeline. "Give it back, Brianna. You're confused. The medication makes you paranoid." I shoved past him and locked the bathroom door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the small brass lock. Through the wooden barrier, I could hear him breathing heavily, could feel his presence like a physical weight pressing against the other side. I set the syringe on the white porcelain sink and grabbed my phone from my bathrobe pocket. My daughter Vanessa would know what to do. I was a pharmacist, worked at the hospital where I was being treated. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again, pacing the small bathroom while Marcus pounded on the door with increasing urgency. His fists made the hinges rattle in their frame. "Mom's calling during work hours." Vanessa's voice finally answered, but something in her tone made my blood run cold. "Is everything okay?" "I need you to test something for me. The medication your father's been giving me." The line went dead. I stared at the black screen, watched my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes, a headscarf covering where my thick black hair used to be. I looked like a woman dying, not a woman being treated. The realization crashed over me like a physical blow. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, pressing the phone against my ear while Marcus's voice turned from demanding to pleading through the door. The dispatcher's voice crackled through, professional and distant, asking questions I could barely process. My eyes stayed locked on the syringe sitting next to the faucet, the clear liquid inside catching the fluorescent light. "My husband, I think he's been tampering with my cancer treatment. I have stage 3 lymphoma. I need police and paramedics." The words sounded insane even as they left my mouth. Marcus had been my husband for 26 years. He'd held my hand through every doctor's appointment, every scan, every consultation. He'd been the one to research clinical trials, to drive me to treatments at 3 a.m. when the nausea got bad. The man pounding on my bathroom door couldn't be the same person who'd proposed to me on a beach in South Carolina, who'd stayed up all night when Vanessa had pneumonia as a baby. But the syringe didn't lie. I grabbed it and held it up to the light, watching the liquid shift inside the clear barrel. As a pharmacist, I'd administered thousands of injections, knew the exact viscosity and color of every medication in my treatment protocol. This was wrong. Too thin. The faint, yellowish tint that should have been present in the methotrexate was completely absent. This looked like nothing more than saline solution, maybe not even that. The pounding stopped. The sudden silence felt more threatening than the noise had been. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any movement. Nothing. Then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving away down the hallway, heading toward our bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs hard enough to hurt. I knew what he kept in the locked drawer of his nightstand. A Glock 19 he'd purchased 5 years ago, after a string of break-ins in our neighborhood. I'd argued against it, hated having a gun in the house, but he'd insisted it was for our protection. Now that word, protection, took on a twisted new meaning. I climbed onto the toilet and pushed open the small window above it, my weakened muscles screaming in protest. The opening was barely 2 feet square, meant for ventilation, not escape. Cold October air rushed in, carrying the scent of dead leaves and approaching rain. I stuck my head through, measuring the distance to the ground below. 12 feet, maybe more. The fall onto our concrete patio would likely break something, and in my condition, I wasn't sure my body could handle that kind of trauma. Footsteps returned, faster this time. Something metallic clicked in the hallway, and I recognized the sound immediately. He'd retrieved the gun. My pharmaceutical knowledge told me I should be rational, should wait for the police the dispatcher said were 7 minutes out. But every survival instinct I'd developed in 50 years screamed at me to move. I grabbed the hand towel from the rack and wrapped the syringe carefully inside it, then shoved the bundle into my bathrobe pocket. The doorknob rattled, testing the lock. Then came a new sound, something scraping in the keyhole. He was picking the lock with something, probably a paperclip or the small toolkit he kept in the kitchen junk drawer. The window was my only option. I pulled myself up onto the narrow sill, my body protesting every movement. The chemotherapy, real or fake, I couldn't be sure anymore, had stolen my strength, turned my muscles to water. I got my shoulders through the opening, then my torso, scraping skin against the aluminum frame. Below me, the patio stretched out like a gray ocean. The lock clicked open behind me. I didn't look back. I pushed myself forward and gravity took over, pulling me through the window in a graceless tumble. For a moment, I was suspended in cold air, the world spinning, my bathrobe billowing around me. Then impact, shoulder first, then hip, then skull against unforgiving concrete. Pain exploded through my body in waves. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding into each other. I tasted copper, realized I'd bitten through my lip. Above me, Marcus's face appeared in the window, his expression unreadable. No anger, no concern, just calculation. That look terrified me more than the gun I knew he was holding. I forced myself to move, rolling onto my hands and knees despite the agony screaming through every nerve. The syringe was still in my pocket, the glass miraculously unbroken. Blood dripped from my mouth onto the concrete, dark droplets spreading across the gray surface. I crawled toward the side gate, each movement an exercise in willpower over physics. The gate latch was too high. I clawed at the wooden slats, leaving red smears across the weathered surface. My fingers found a gap between boards, and I pulled myself upright, legs trembling beneath me like saplings in a storm. The metal latch was cold against my palm, slick with my own blood. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, footsteps on the patio. Slow, Deliberate, not running. He didn't need to run. I slammed my shoulder against the gate. Once. Twice. The impact sent lightning through my collarbone, but the wood held firm. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. I tasted bile rising in my throat, swallowed it down. The syringe pressed against my thigh through the thin fabric of my pajama pants. Evidence that could save me or condemn me, depending on who got to tell the story. The neighbors will hear you. Marcus's voice came from somewhere behind me, conversational, almost bored. I didn't answer, couldn't waste the breath. I turned from the gate and scanned the backyard. My backyard, the one I'd tended for 15 years, where I'd planted roses and hosted barbecues and watched my children learn to ride bikes. Now it was a trap. The wooden fence stretched 6 feet high on all sides. The storage shed hunched in the far corner, padlocked. Garden tools scattered across the lawn, left from weekend projects I no longer had the strength to finish. My eyes landed on the aluminum ladder lying on its side near the tomato plants. It was only 5 feet, but it might be enough. I lurched forward, my bare feet catching on the uneven grass. Every step felt like wading through concrete. The chemotherapy had done that much at least. Whether diluted or not, it had carved me hollow, turned my bones to bird bones, my blood to thin soup. I reached the ladder and grabbed it with both hands. The metal was freezing, morning dew coating every rung. I tried to lift it, but my arms gave out immediately. The ladder clattered back down, the sound impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. I gritted my teeth and tried again, this time dragging it across the lawn. The aluminum scraped against grass and dirt, leaving a trail through the frost. Marcus was closer now. I could hear his breathing, steady and calm. Could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn on our first date, 23 years ago. My stomach turned. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" His tone carried a hint of genuine curiosity, as if this were an intellectual puzzle rather than a chase. I hauled the ladder upright against the back fence, my muscles screaming protest. The top barely reached the fence line. It would have to do. I grabbed the first rung and pulled myself up. My arms shook violently, threatening to give out. 1 rung, 2. My feet found purchase on the wet aluminum. 3 rungs, a hand closed around my ankle. I kicked backward blindly, connected with something solid. Heard a grunt. The grip loosened, and I scrambled higher, my fingernails scraping against the rough wood of the fence top. Splinters drove deep into my palms, but I didn't stop. I got one elbow over the fence, then the other, leveraging my body weight forward. The ladder shifted beneath me. Marcus pulled it away, and I was left dangling, my legs kicking empty air. The fence bit into my stomach, my arms taking my full weight. I couldn't hold on. My fingers were numb, useless. I was sliding backward. Then my hand found the top rail, and I pulled with everything I had left. My body scraped over the fence top, wood tearing through fabric and skin. I pitched forward, out of his reach, and fell into the neighbor's yard. The impact drove the air from my lungs. I lay gasping like a landed fish, staring up at the lightening sky. No time to rest. I pushed myself up and ran. I hit the neighbor's back door with both fists, not caring about the hour or the noise. My knuckles left smears of blood on the white paint. Inside, a dog erupted in frantic barking. A light flickered on in an upstairs window. "Please!" The word ripped from my throat, hoarse and desperate. I hammered again, harder. Behind me, I heard Marcus curse from the other side of the fence. He was climbing it. The wood creaked under his weight. I turned and saw his hands appear at the top. his face following a second later. Our eyes met across the 20 feet separating us. The door jerked open. An elderly man in striped pajamas stood there, his face creased with sleep and confusion. A small terrier circled his legs, still yapping. "My husband. He's trying to kill me." I stumbled forward into the doorway. "Please, I need to call the police." The man's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he took in my appearance, my torn nightgown, the blood running down my arms from the fence, the wild terror in my eyes. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Gerald, what's happening?" A woman's voice called from somewhere deeper in the house. Marcus dropped into the yard behind me. He landed in a crouch, perfectly balanced, like some nightmare predator. Then he straightened and brushed the dirt from his hands, his movements casual, unhurried. He started walking toward us. "Inside, now." Gerald grabbed my arm and yanked me through the doorway. He slammed the door and twisted the deadbolt. His hands shook as he engaged the chain lock. Through the door's window, I watched Marcus stop at the bottom of the porch steps. He stood there, completely still, his head tilted slightly as if listening. Then he smiled. Not the warm smile I'd fallen in love with decades ago, but something else entirely. Something that made my bladder threaten to let go. He raised one hand and pointed at me, mouthed 3 words through the glass. "You are mine." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the side of the house. The woman appeared in the hallway wearing a floral robe, her gray hair in curlers. Her mouth opened when she saw me, but no sound came out. Gerald moved past her to a small table by the stairs and picked up a cordless phone. His fingers fumbled with the buttons. I backed away from the door, unable to stop staring at the empty porch beyond it. My whole body shook now, violent tremors I couldn't control. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall to the floor. The terrier approached cautiously, sniffing at my bloody hands. "Yes, we need police. There's a woman. She says someone's trying to kill her." Gerald's voice seemed to come from very far away. The woman knelt beside me. She tried to take my hand, but I jerked it away, my body moving on pure instinct. She didn't try again. Instead, she just sat there, her presence solid and real beside me. "They're coming," Gerald said. 5 minutes, they said. 5 minutes. An eternity. I pressed my back harder against the wall, as if I could merge with it, become part of the house's structure where Marcus couldn't reach me. My mind raced through calculations. He knew where I was. He was out there somewhere, probably watching. Would he wait for the police? Or would he have already slipped back to our house, ready with his concerned husband act? I thought of Vanessa sleeping in her apartment across town, blissfully unaware. And Trevor, probably already awake and getting ready for his hospital shift. My babies. They'd been feeding me diluted medication for months, watching me deteriorate. All while Marcus orchestrated the whole thing, probably promising them my life insurance money. The terrier's wet nose pressed against my arm. I focused on that small warmth, that simple reality, while my thoughts spiraled into darker territory. The pattern was so clear now, Trevor always bringing me water with my pills, Vanessa insisting on preparing my meals during her visits. Both of them texting Marcus constantly, their phones lighting up with his messages whenever they were with me. I pulled my knees to my chest, ignoring the sharp pain from my scraped shins. The woman beside me rose slowly and disappeared into what I assumed was the kitchen. Water ran in pipes somewhere behind the walls. Gerald stood by the window now, holding back the curtain with one finger, peering out into the pre-dawn darkness. "Do you see anyone out there?" My voice cracked on the words. He shook his head but didn't step away from the window. His jaw was tight, his free hand clenched at his side. Whatever he'd seen in my face at the door had convinced him I wasn't crazy. Or maybe he just wanted the police to come so I'd be their problem instead of his. The woman returned with a damp cloth and a glass of water. She set the water on the floor beside me, then gently, so gently, began wiping the blood from my hands. I watched her work, seeing the dark red smears transfer to the white cloth. Some of it was dried and flaking, turning brown at the edges. I had to scrub at those spots. "I'm Ruth," she said quietly, not looking up from her task. "You're safe here until they arrive." Safe. The word felt foreign. I'd been sleeping in the same bed as my would-be killer for months, eating meals prepared by my own children, while poison or water replaced the chemicals that were supposed to save my life. The medical reports suddenly made sense. Tumor markers rising instead of falling, new lesions appearing on scans when the oncologist had expected shrinkage. Dr. Patterson's confused frown as she reviewed my charts, muttering about treatment resistance. My phone. I still had it clenched in my left hand, the screen dark now. I pressed the button and 17 missed calls lit up the display. Marcus, Trevor, Vanessa, Marcus. The last one had come through 2 minutes ago. I held the phone up to show Ruth. "They won't stop calling." She took the phone carefully from my hand and powered it off completely. The screen went black with a soft chime. Gerald turned from the window, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or fear that whatever chaos had invaded his morning might linger. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The terrier's ears perked up and it trotted to the door, tail wagging. Blue and red lights began strobing through the windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. I tried to stand, but my legs were rubber. Ruth gripped my elbow, hauling me up with surprising strength for someone her size. Gerald opened the door before the officers could knock. 2 uniformed figures filled the doorway, their bulk and authority transforming the small entryway. The first one through was tall, with silver hair cropped close to his skull. His partner, younger with dark eyes that took in everything, stepped to the side and rested one hand on his belt near his radio. "We got a call about a woman in distress," the silver-haired officer said. I stepped forward, my body moving before I could think. The words tumbled out in a rush. Marcus, the medication, my children, the diluted chemotherapy. The officer's expression shifted from professional concern to something harder. He pulled out a small notepad and began writing while I talked. His partner moved to the door, scanning the street outside. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to slow down," the silver-haired one said. "Let's start with your name and address." I gave him the information, watching him write it down in careful block letters. When I said Marcus's name, I saw the partner's head turn slightly. Recognition flickered across his face. "Marcus Banks, the insurance agent?" he asked. Of course, Marcus would be known to the local police. He was always at community events, always pressing the flesh and building his reputation. The concerned citizen, the devoted husband caring for his sick wife. My stomach churned. "That's him," I said, "and he's been trying to kill me. Slowly, making it look like the cancer was just taking its natural course." The silver-haired officer exchanged a glance with his partner. I saw the skepticism there, the doubt creeping in. A hysterical woman in her nightgown at 5 a.m, making wild accusations about her upstanding husband. I'd seen enough true crime shows to know how this looked. "I can prove it," I said, grabbing the older officer's arm. He stiffened, but didn't pull away. "My medication bottles are at home. Test them." The concentration will be wrong. And check my medical records. Ask why the treatment isn't working when it should be. The partner stepped closer, his radio crackling with static. We're going to sort this out, ma'am. But first, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I looked down at my hands, at the scrapes on my legs, the torn nightgown. Blood had soaked through the fabric at my knees. I fell running, but I'm not going back to that house. Not while he's there. The silver-haired officer guided me toward the patrol car with a gentle hand on my elbow. His touch was firm, but not forceful, and I didn't resist. Every muscle in my body screamed with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried me through the dark streets was evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made each step feel like wading through concrete. The back seat smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. I slid across the vinyl, wincing as the rough fabric caught on my torn nightgown. Through the metal grating that separated the front and back seats, I watched the younger officer, his nameplate read Chen, lean against the hood and speak into his radio. His words were too quiet to hear, but I caught Marcus's name. My husband's name. The man who had been diluting my chemotherapy while I grew weaker and sicker, believing my body was simply losing the fight. The door opened on the passenger side, and the older officer, Patterson, according to his badge, settled into the front seat with a clipboard. He turned to face me through the grating, his weathered face neutral, but his eyes sharp and assessing. We're sending a unit to your house right now, he said. They'll secure the medication bottles you mentioned. We'll also need to take you to the hospital to document any injuries and draw blood. My throat tightened. Blood work won't show anything. The chemo he gave me was diluted, not poisoned. That's the genius of it. The drugs were real, just not strong enough to actually work. My oncologist would just see that I'm not responding to treatment. Patterson made another note, his pen scratching across paper. Your oncologist? What's the name? Dr. Amara Patel. She's with the Cancer Center on Riverside Drive. She's been frustrated with my progress for months. Kept saying the tumor markers should be dropping, that someone my age with my diagnosis should be responding better. The words tumbled out faster now, my hands gripping the edge of the seat. I could feel my pulse hammering in my wrists, could taste copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my cheek during the run. Every detail felt crucial, every piece of evidence another thread that might weave together into something the police couldn't dismiss. Officer Chen climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater blasted stale air that made my damp nightgown cling even more uncomfortably to my skin. I shivered despite the warmth, my body finally registering the cold that had numbed my feet during the flight from my house. There's something else, I said, leaning forward until my forehead nearly touched the grating. Marcus took out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago, right after my diagnosis. $2 million. I didn't think anything of it at the time. He handles all our finances, said it was just smart planning. Patterson's pen stopped moving. He turned to look at Chen, and I saw something shift in their expressions. The skepticism didn't vanish entirely, but it cracked. Money was a motive they understood, a concrete reason that made my accusations feel less like paranoid delusions and more like a case worth investigating. Do you have documentation of this policy? Patterson asked. I shook my head, then stopped as the motion made the world tilt sideways. It's in his office. The file cabinet, second drawer. He keeps all the important papers there. The patrol car pulled away from the curb, the morning streets still mostly empty, except for a few early commuters. Through the window, I watched my neighborhood slide past. Familiar houses where I'd attended barbecues and holiday parties, where neighbors had brought casseroles after my diagnosis and promised to keep me in their prayers. They had no idea what was happening behind my closed doors. Neither had I, until last night. My stomach lurched suddenly, and I pressed my hand against my mouth. The nausea hit in waves, hot and acidic. Chen must have noticed because he pulled over immediately, unlocking the back door from the front. I barely made it to the curb before vomiting onto the concrete, my body heaving until there was nothing left but bile and the metallic taste of fear. Patterson appeared beside me with a bottle of water. I rinsed my mouth, spat, then drank deeply. My hands trembled so violently that water sloshed down my chin. "It's the stress," I managed to say. "Or maybe the real chemo finally working its way out of my system. I don't even know anymore what's the cancer and what's the poison." He steadied me as I stood, his grip professional and impersonal. "The hospital can run a full toxicology screen. We'll make sure Dr. Patel is contacted directly." Back in the patrol car, I pressed my cheek against the cold window and closed my eyes. The glass vibrated with the motion of the vehicle, and I focused on that sensation, something real and immediate that kept me anchored. My mind wanted to spiral into panic, to replay every moment of the past months when Marcus had handed me those pills with a concerned smile, when he'd sat beside me during infusion appointments and held my hand like a devoted partner. How long had he been planning this? Had he started diluting the medication immediately? Or had he given me a few real doses first to avoid suspicion? And the hospital infusions, those had been real, administered by nurses who checked and double-checked every bag. That must have frustrated him, must have made him realize he needed to be patient. The poison was in the take-home medications, the pills I swallowed obediently every morning and evening while he watched. We pulled into the hospital emergency entrance, and the fluorescent lights made me squint. Patterson opened my door and helped me out, his hand steady under my elbow as my legs threatened to buckle. A nurse in pink scrubs rushed forward with a wheelchair, her face creased with concern as she took in my appearance. The torn nightgown, the bleeding knees, the wild desperation that must have been written across every feature. "Possible poisoning case," Patterson told her quietly. "We need a full workup and toxicology. Her oncologist is Dr. Patel at the Cancer Center." The nurse's expression shifted from concern to alarm. She gripped the wheelchair handles and pushed me toward the automatic doors at a pace just short of running. The wheels squeaked against the tile floor, and the hospital smell, antiseptic and illness and fear, wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I'd spent so much time in buildings like this over the past year, poisoning myself under doctors' orders in the hope of staying alive. I'd never imagined that the real threat was waiting for me at home, measuring out death in carefully calculated doses. The emergency room became a blur of motion and sound. Nurses descended on me like practiced dancers, each knowing their role without discussion. One wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, while another positioned a pulse oximeter on my finger. The machines beeped their various rhythms, creating a discordant symphony that made my head throb worse. I closed my eyes against the overhead lights, but someone gently lifted my eyelids to shine a penlight directly into my pupils. "Reactive, but sluggish," a male voice announced. "Get me a line started." The sting of the IV needle barely registered compared to the cramping in my stomach. I curled forward involuntarily, wrapping my arms around my middle as another wave of nausea rolled through me. Someone thrust a kidney-shaped basin into my hands just as I retched, bringing up nothing but bitter yellow bile. My throat burned. Sweat ran down my temples and between my shoulder blades, soaking through what remained of my nightgown. "I need those pills analyzed immediately." Patterson's voice cut through the chaos. "And check her blood for anything unusual. Heavy metals, toxins, anything that shouldn't be there." A doctor appeared at my side, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and her brown eyes sharp with focus. She didn't introduce herself, just began pressing her fingers along my abdomen with clinical precision. Each touch sent jolts of pain radiating through my core. I gasped and tried to pull away, but hands on my shoulders kept me in place. "Significant tenderness here and here," she announced to someone behind her. "Possible gastric erosion. How long have you been experiencing these symptoms?" I tried to form words, but my tongue felt thick and clumsy. "Weeks. Thought it was the cancer treatments." The doctor's expression darkened. She pulled out a small flashlight and examined the inside of my mouth, then my eyes again. Her fingers traced the lymph nodes in my neck, pausing at each one. "Your mucous membranes show signs of chronic irritation. This isn't consistent with your chemotherapy protocol." She turned away, barking orders. "I want a complete blood panel, liver and kidney function, and get gastroenterology down here now. Someone call Dr. Patel. I need her patient records immediately." More needles. More vials of blood drawn from the IV line they'd established in my left arm. A nurse attached electrodes to my chest for an EKG, the adhesive pulling at my skin. Another wrapped a warm blanket around my shoulders, but I couldn't stop shivering. The tremors came from somewhere deep inside, beyond the reach of external comfort. Patterson stood near the wall, staying out of the medical team's way, but watching everything with that same intense focus. He still held the evidence bag containing my pill bottles, and I saw him speaking quietly into his phone, presumably to the lab technicians who would analyze the contents. His jaw was set tight, muscles working beneath the skin. The cramping intensified, a vice tightening around my internal organs. I doubled over again, crying out despite my best efforts to stay quiet. The doctor was there immediately, her hand on my back. "Give her 4 milligrams of ondansetron for the nausea, and let's get some activated charcoal ready if we confirm recent ingestion." "She vomited at the scene approximately 30 minutes ago," Patterson interjected. "Multiple times." The doctor nodded, processing this information. "Then we'll hold off on the charcoal for now. Let's focus on supportive care and identification." A younger doctor, barely out of his 20s with sandy hair and freckles across his nose, approached with an ultrasound machine. He squeezed cold gel onto my abdomen and pressed the wand against my skin, moving it in slow circles while watching a screen I couldn't see. The pressure made me want to vomit again, but I clenched my teeth and focused on breathing through my nose. "Significant fluid accumulation," he reported, "and the gastric lining looks inflamed. I'm seeing what might be erosion or ulceration here." My stomach wasn't just sick, it was damaged, corroded from the inside by whatever Marcus had been feeding me. The reality settled over me like a weight, making it hard to breathe. He hadn't just been trying to kill me quickly. He'd been doing it slowly, methodically, watching me suffer week after week while pretending concern. The nurse who'd brought the blanket now held a cup of water with a straw. "Just small sips," she instructed gently. "We need to keep you hydrated, but not too much at once." The water tasted metallic, or maybe that was just my mouth. I managed 3 small swallows before my stomach threatened rebellion again. The nurse set the cup aside and patted my shoulder with unexpected tenderness. Her name tag read Gloria, and her dark hands were warm against my cold skin. Dr. Patel arrived like a storm, her white coat billowing behind her as she strode through the emergency room entrance. Her normally composed face was flushed with anger, eyes flashing as she took in my condition. She'd been my oncologist for 11 months, had held my hand through the worst of the diagnosis, had celebrated with me when the tumors began shrinking. Now she looked at me with something close to fury, not at me, but at the situation. "Show me everything," she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. The emergency doctor handed over the chart they'd been building, and Dr. Patel's eyes scanned the pages with practiced speed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not consistent with cisplatin side effects. The timing is wrong, the severity is wrong, and her last infusion was only at 40% dosage because she was tolerating it so poorly." She looked up at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. "Brianna, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Have you been taking any supplements, any herbal remedies, anything not prescribed by me?" Story block 8 to 10. My fingers closed around the bathroom counter as I steadied myself, the hospital discharge papers crumpling in my grip. 3 days had passed since the emergency room, 3 days of tests and questions and the slow, creeping horror of understanding. Dr. Patel had been clear. Someone had been diluting my chemotherapy. The medications I'd been taking at home. The pills Marcus prepared for me each morning. The liquid supplements he mixed into my protein shakes. All of it contaminated with something that mimicked overdose symptoms, while my actual cancer treatment grew weaker and weaker. The house felt different now, like a stage set I was seeing from backstage. The kitchen where Marcus had so carefully prepared my meals. The medicine cabinet he'd organized with such precision. The locked drawer in his desk that I'd never questioned before. I moved through the hallway with deliberate steps, each footfall silent on the carpet. My body still felt hollow, scraped clean by days of vomiting and the aggressive hydration therapy. But my mind burned with crystalline clarity. The locked drawer waited in Marcus's study, and I held a screwdriver in my hand. Not the tiny kind for eyeglasses, but a proper flathead I'd taken from the garage toolbox. The study door opened without sound. I'd oiled the hinges myself years ago, back when squeaks and creaks were just annoyances, not potential warnings. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of gold and shadow. Marcus's desk sat against the far wall, the same mahogany monster he'd inherited from his father. 4 drawers on the right side, and the bottom one had been locked for as long as I could remember. "Just old papers," he'd always said. "Boring financial stuff." I wedged the screwdriver into the gap between drawer and frame. The wood resisted, then splintered with a crack that seemed loud as a gunshot in the quiet house. My hands shook as I pulled the drawer open, splinters catching on my palm. Inside, neat rows of amber prescription bottles stood like soldiers, my name on every label. Cisplatin, ondansetron, dexamethasone. But the dates were wrong, some from months ago, bottles I thought I'd emptied and thrown away. I lifted one, shook it, heard the rattle of pills inside, nearly full. Behind the bottles, a composition notebook with a black and white cover. I flipped it open, saw Marcus's precise handwriting filling page after page. Dates, dosages, calculations. My hands trembled so violently the pages blurred. Day 43. Reduced cisplatin to 60%. Substituted with saline solution. Day 67. Further reduction to 40%. B. showing expected cancer progression according to timeline. Timeline. The word sat on the page like a living thing. The notebook slipped from my fingers, hit the carpet with a soft thud. I bent to retrieve it and saw something else in the drawer's depths. A manila folder, edges worn soft with handling. Inside, insurance documents. Policy declarations. Beneficiary forms with my signature. No, not quite my signature. Close enough to pass casual inspection, but with subtle differences in the loop of the B, the slant of the N. $500,000 in life insurance. Another $200,000 from my 401k. The house, paid off, worth at least $400,000 in the current market. Footsteps on the front porch. The jingle of keys. I shoved everything back into the drawer, slammed it closed despite the broken lock. The screwdriver went into my cardigan pocket, pressing cold against my ribs through the thin fabric. I was standing in the middle of the study when Marcus walked in, his face shifting through surprise to concern in the span of a heartbeat. "Baby, what are you doing out of bed? Dr. Patel said you needed rest." I watched him cross the room toward me, this man I'd loved for 23 years. His salt and pepper hair still damp from the rain outside, his expensive suit jacket dark at the shoulders, his hands reaching for me with practiced tenderness. Those same hands that had held the dropper, that had measured out my death in careful doses, that had probably researched the exact amount needed to make me sick without making it obvious. "I needed some papers," I said. My voice came out steady, almost normal. "Tax documents?" His eyes flicked past me to the desk, to the splintered drawer that couldn't quite close. The concern on his face froze, then slowly rearranged itself into something else, something watchful and cold. "You opened the drawer." Not a question. I took a step backward, felt the edge of the bookshelf press against my spine. The screwdriver in my pocket suddenly felt inadequate, a child's toy against whatever was happening in this moment. Marcus moved to the desk, pulled the broken drawer fully open, looked down at the scattered evidence of his calculations. When he turned back to me, his face had emptied of all expression. "You weren't supposed to survive the hospital. That last dose should have finished it." The words hit like physical blows. I grabbed the bookshelf for support, felt leather-bound volumes shift under my grip. "Why?" He laughed, a short bark of sound without humor. $500,000 in insurance, Brianna. Plus your retirement, plus this house. And Denise, she's been waiting. Very patiently, I might add. Denise, his secretary. The woman who always smiled too warmly at church functions, who brought casseroles after my diagnosis, who touched his arm with easy familiarity. Marcus took a step toward me, then another. His hands hung loose at his sides, but I saw the calculation in his eyes, the same mathematical precision he'd used to plot my death, now measuring distances and angles. "You're still weak, still sick. If you fell down the stairs, broke your neck, well, that would be tragic, but believable. Cancer patient, weakened by treatment, terrible accident." I yanked the screwdriver from my pocket, held it between us like a knife. The metal caught the afternoon light, threw it back in a bright slash. "Stay away from me." He smiled then, and it was worse than anger would have been. "Or what? You'll stab me? You can barely stand." He was right. My legs trembled with exhaustion, my stomach still cramped from days of purging poison. But I'd survived his careful murder. I'd survived because some part of me, some stubborn cellular resistance, had refused to die on his timeline. I'd vomited up his solutions, my body rejecting the death he'd planned with such precision. Marcus lunged forward, faster than I expected. His hand grabbed for the screwdriver, fingers closing around my wrist with crushing force. I drove my knee up hard, connected with his groin, heard his grunt of pain. We stumbled together toward the desk, locked in an embrace that was grotesque parody of affection. I twisted sideways as we fell, used his momentum against him. The desk edge caught him across the hip, and he released my wrist with a hiss. I scrambled backward, my shoulder blades hitting the filing cabinet with a metallic clang. The screwdriver was still gripped in my shaking hand, its orange handle slick with my sweat. Marcus straightened slowly, one hand pressed to his side. Blood trickled from where the desk corner had torn through his shirt. His breath came in sharp bursts, but his eyes never left mine. He shifted his weight, testing his injured hip, then reached behind him. When his hand emerged, it held the letter opener from his desk, 8 inches of brass shaped like a dagger, the point filed to genuine sharpness. The afternoon sun slanted through the window behind him, turned him into a silhouette edged in gold. Dust motes danced in the light between us. I could hear the neighbor's lawnmower buzzing somewhere far away, could smell the lingering sweetness of the diluted chemotherapy still on my clothes. My wedding ring caught the light as I adjusted my grip on the screwdriver. 23 years I'd worn that ring. 23 years of lying next to a man who'd counted the days until my death. He moved left. I mirrored him. We circled each other around the desk, like predators, like strangers, like everything we'd actually always been beneath the performance of marriage. My hip bumped the desk drawer, the one where I'd found the saline bottles, the receipts, the careful documentation of my murder. Evidence. I needed it intact. Marcus feinted right, then dove left across the desk. Paper scattered. The computer monitor tipped and crashed to the floor in an explosion of glass and sparks. I threw myself backward through the doorway into the hall, my feet tangling in the runner. I went down hard on my tailbone, pain shooting up my spine like lightning. He was on top of me before I could roll away, his weight crushing my chest, the letter opener arcing down toward my throat. I brought the screwdriver up in a desperate upward thrust. The blade caught his forearm, slid through muscle and scraped bone. His scream was raw, animal, nothing like the measured voice that had told me about insurance and wills and making sure I'd be taken care of. The letter opener fell from his spasming fingers, clattered against the hardwood floor. Blood ran hot and wet over my hand, soaked into my sleeve. I shoved him off me with strength I didn't know I still possessed. He rolled onto his side, clutching his arm, his face gone gray with shock. The screwdriver remained embedded in his flesh, its handle protruding at an obscene angle. I crawled toward the stairs, my body screaming protest with every movement. Behind me, I could hear him trying to rise, his good hand slapping against the floor as he sought purchase. The front door was 10 feet away. 10 feet, and I could run, could scream, could flag down a passing car. But the evidence was upstairs in his office. The proof of what he'd done, what Denise had helped him do. Without it, this became nothing more than a domestic dispute. A sick woman who'd attacked her devoted husband in a fit of paranoid delusion. The doctors would testify about my mental state. The oncologist would explain how cancer patients sometimes suffered psychological breaks. Denise would cry at the funeral, and everyone would pat Marcus's shoulder and tell him he'd been a saint. I changed direction, grabbed the fallen letter opener from where it lay against the baseboard. The brass was warm from his hand, the weight of it solid and real. I pulled myself upright using the banister, turned to face him. He'd made it to his knees, his left arm hanging useless and bloody at his side. The screwdriver had worked itself loose with his movements, now dangled from torn flesh by a few remaining fibers. "Stay down," I said. He lunged anyway. One final desperate attempt, his good hand reaching for my throat. I stepped aside, barely, my exhausted muscles responding a half-second slower than my brain commanded. His momentum carried him past me, his shoulder striking the banister post with a crack that echoed through the hall. He stumbled, his feet searching for balance that wasn't there, and then he was falling backward down the stairs he'd meant for me. The sounds were terrible. Each impact distinct, shoulder, head, hip, head again, a percussive rhythm that ended with a final wet crunch at the bottom landing. Then silence, except for my ragged breathing and the lawnmower's distant buzz. I gripped the banister, my knuckles white against the dark wood, and looked down at the twisted shape of him sprawled across the entryway tile. His chest still moved, shallow, irregular breaths that bubbled with liquid. One leg was bent at an impossible angle. Blood pooled slowly beneath his head, spreading across the white tile like spilled wine. His eyes found mine, cognizant, aware, filled with something that might have been fear or rage, or the final recognition that his mathematics had failed to account for all variables. I descended the stairs carefully, one step at a time. My phone was in the kitchen where I'd left it hours ago, before I'd gone searching for water bottles and found murder instead. I walked past Marcus without looking down, my feet leaving red prints on the tile. The letter opener I placed carefully on the entry table next to the mail basket and his car keys. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. My fingers shook as I dialed, as I waited for the dispatcher's voice. Behind me, Marcus's breathing had gone quiet. When I turned to look, his chest no longer moved. His eyes stared at nothing. Their calculation finally ended. 911, what's your emergency? My husband tried to kill me, I said. He's been diluting my chemotherapy for months. I have proof. And now he's dead. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the yoga studio's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. I rolled out my mat in the back row, watching dust motes dance in the light. My body moved through the sun salutation with fluid precision, arms rising overhead, folding forward, stepping back into plank. The strength had returned to my limbs gradually over the months, muscle memory awakening after the real chemotherapy finally coursed through my veins at proper concentrations. The instructor's voice guided us through warrior pose. I held the stance, feeling my quadriceps burn, my core engaged. In the mirror along the wall, I caught my reflection, hair growing back in tight silver curls, skin glowing with health instead of the sallow pallor that had marked those poisoned months. The woman looking back at me was someone I'd fought to become again. After class, I walked 3 blocks to the community center. My sneakers slapped against the pavement in a steady rhythm. The spring air carried the scent of blooming magnolias and fresh-cut grass. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground. I breathed it all in deeply, filling my lungs with the simple pleasure of being alive. The conference room was already half full when I arrived. Women of various ages sat in the circle of folding chairs, some clutching coffee cups, others twisting tissues between their fingers. I recognized the look on their faces, the same haunted confusion I'd worn when I first learned what Marcus had done. I set my bag down and began arranging the handouts on the table. Each packet contained information on financial abuse, medical advocacy, legal resources. The title across the top read, "Recognizing Medical Manipulation, A Survivor's Guide." Thank you all for coming, I said, standing before the group. My name is Brianna, and 6 months ago, I discovered my husband had been systematically poisoning me. The words came easier now. I'd told this story a dozen times. To the police, to the prosecutor, to my oncologist, to my therapist. Each telling scraped away another layer of shame that had never been mine to carry. I walked them through the warning signs. The unexplained deterioration despite treatment, the family member insisting on controlling all medications, the isolation from medical professionals who might ask questions. Around the circle, heads nodded. One woman wiped tears from her cheeks. Another gripped her neighbor's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. The insurance company records showed everything, I continued. Marcus had been pocketing the difference between what real chemotherapy cost and what saline solution cost. $73,000 over 8 months. A hand rose tentatively from the third row. Did you know? I mean, before you found out? My body knew, I said. I kept telling doctors something felt wrong. They ran tests that showed the medication in my bloodstream, but at levels that made no sense. He was giving me just enough to show up on blood work, but not enough to actually treat the cancer. I moved through the rest of the presentation. How to secure your medications, how to verify prescriptions, how to document concerns, how to build a safety plan. The practical mechanics of survival. When I finished, several women approached with questions. I gave each one my full attention, shared resource numbers, offered contact information for the lawyers and advocates who'd helped me navigate the aftermath. Outside, the afternoon had turned golden. I drove across town to the cemetery, parking in the familiar spot beneath the oak tree. My mother's headstone was simple granite, her name and dates carved in elegant script. I knelt on the grass beside it, pulling weeds from around the base, arranging the fresh daisies I'd brought. I made it, Mama, I whispered. The cancer's in remission. Full remission. The wind rustled through the oak leaves overhead. I pressed my palm against the sun-warmed stone, feeling the solid reality of it, the permanence. Marcus was buried in a different cemetery across town, a plot I'd never visited and never would. His life insurance had been denied when the investigation revealed his crimes. My civil suit against his estate had recovered most of what he'd stolen, plus damages. The money sat in an account I barely touched, blood money that felt contaminated despite its legal transfer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my oncologist's office, appointment confirmation for next week's follow-up scan. I typed a quick reply, then stood and brushed grass from my knees. The drive home took me past the old house, the one with the stairs where everything had ended. New owners had moved in last month. I'd sold it fully furnished, unable to walk through those rooms again. Through the windows, I could see children's toys scattered across the living room floor. A bicycle leaned against the porch railing. Life continuing, innocent and unaware of the violence those walls had witnessed. My apartment was small, but filled with light. I'd furnished it simply: a couch, a table, a bed, plants on every windowsill. No photographs of Marcus remained. I'd burned them all in a metal trash can behind the building on a cold February night, watching his face curl and blacken in the flames. I changed into running clothes and laced up my shoes. The trail behind the complex wound through woods for 3 miles, a loop I could complete now without stopping. 6 months ago, I couldn't walk to the mailbox without gasping. I pushed through the first mile, finding my rhythm, feeling my heartbeat strong and steady in my chest. Sweat dampened my shirt. My lungs expanded and contracted with clean air, with oxygen carried by blood cells that multiplied healthy and true. On the second mile, another runner passed me going the opposite direction. We exchanged nods, strangers sharing the trail. Simple human acknowledgement. I smiled and kept moving. The final stretch climbed a small hill. I powered up it, legs burning, arms pumping. At the top, I paused to catch my breath. The view stretched across the valley, rooftops and treetops, and the river winding through it all like silver thread. Alive, present, free. Back at the apartment, I showered and dressed, then opened my laptop. The blog I'd started 3 months ago had grown to over 15,000 followers. Women from across the country shared their stories in the comments, tales of medical abuse, financial manipulation, systematic poisoning by those who'd promised to love them. I read each one, responded when I could, offered resources and validation, and the simple truth that they weren't crazy, weren't imagining things, weren't to blame. My fingers moved across the keyboard, drafting the next post. Words about trusting your instincts, about documentation, about the courage it takes to question those closest to you, about surviving. The evening settled around me as I wrote. Streetlights flickered on outside. In the apartment next door, a television murmured through the wall. Somewhere above me, footsteps crossed a floor. The sounds of ordinary life, the symphony of survival. I hit publish and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, I'd lead another support group. Next week, I'd undergo another scan. Next month, I'd testify before a state committee reviewing legislation about medication tampering. The future stretched ahead with all its uncertainty and possibility. But tonight, I simply existed, breathing, healing, living on my own terms. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.